10 years ago, one of our national news magazines decided to have an issue devoted to American personalities who reflected certain values that were dominant in our culture. And so one of the characteristics that they thought most described American culture 10 years ago, and one can still see it at work today, is cynicism. Who might you imagine that celebrity would be that they would pick to embody that cynicism? David Letterman. You can see it in his humor, irony and cynicism. And so there was an entire article about how David Letterman, they weren't saying he was responsible for the cynicism of American society, but that his humor reflected it, and his popularity was a sign of, or embodied that very cynicism that had seemed to take over American culture. Is there an airplane? And so one of the responses to this article was from a literature professor who pointed out that cynicism came to the fore after the generations that were into Romanticism. Romanticism, of course, becomes sentimental and sees all kinds of things at work in hidden places. Romanticism, as Isaiah Berlin, the philosopher, once pointed out, Romanticism gave rise, really, politically, to fascism and Nazism. But Romanticism in, the Christmas card business and things like that affects our society in a different way. So most of us grew up with parents, or at least grandparents, who were strongly affected by a romanticist view of the world. It's not uncommon, therefore, that we might react by being pretty skeptical and even cynical about a lot of things. And when you look at the state of politics in the United States today, you can see what happens when that cynicism combines with anger and frustration. And what this literature professor pointed out was Romanticism and cynicism had something in common. He referred to them as two sides of the same coin. They were both dishonest ways of looking at reality. And they were also ways of looking at reality that had forgotten about awe and gratitude. Awe and gratitude. A sense of wonder and a sense of appreciation and thankfulness. So Thanksgiving looms for us on Thursday. Some of us will be celebrating with people in our households. Some will be celebrating with others. Some will be celebrating with family. Some may be alone. But it is a holiday that's one of the most difficult to avoid in American culture. And I'm not going to talk about the holiday so much as the message that supposedly is behind the holiday, or the word Thanksgiving, gratitude. It is one, as the professor of literature pointed out, that seems to be missing from our culture. It's even missing a lot in the church. Even church life is infected with a certain cynicism or skepticism. So, what do we do about gratitude? Whatever happened to it? Where might we find it to recover it in our own lives? Earlier this week, when I was not very grateful for the cold that I was fighting off, and my car quitting on me 2 or 3 times a day, I still tried to put together a list of, don't worry, it's in the shop. I'll be very grateful Tuesday after I pay the $500 for the new part that will make it run again. But I started to make a list of what does it mean to be grateful, or how can I cultivate this in my own life? And I shortened the list. I only have 3 suggestions for you tonight. The first is to slow down. Or maybe in tech-savvy 2010 to, from time to time, disconnect. All of us are going to go home later tonight to houses and apartments and condos with We've got smartphones in our pockets. Some of us are connected 24 hours a day to Facebook and 2 or 3 different email addresses. And no wonder we're busy. And no wonder we don't have time to just sit there for a few minutes and think about what's going on in our own lives, or to look out the window at the beauty of the world, or even the turmoil of the world. So my first bit of advice would be find ways, maybe between now and Thursday, or sometime over the weekend, where you can just disconnect for 10 minutes. Turn things off. Allow yourself to just be with yourself. Slow down and take a good look at this remarkable world in which we are privileged to live. If I've heard one preacher say this, I've heard a dozen. The attitude of gratitude. You have to cultivate the attitude of gratitude. Sounds trite, I know. But it's true in a sense. Because there is a sense in which gratitude from a theological, from a faith standpoint, is not just something that we do. It's an attitude that we cultivate. Perhaps you've heard the story of the shopper who went to the mall the day before Thanksgiving to get her Christmas shopping out of the way, to discover that a number of other people had done the same, and the mall was busy. And she did all of her Christmas shopping, and toward the end of the day she decided she needed a coffee break just to sit down and catch her breath and think about some things that she wanted to do later in that evening when she got home to her husband. And she also wanted to read an article in one of the magazines she bought at the bookstore down at the other end of the mall. So she stopped at one of those little shops that sells cookies and bought a little bag of sugar cookies. And then she went over to another place and grabbed Starbucks and found part of the table. There were no tables where she could just sit by herself. So she sat down at this table across from a man who was buried in his newspaper, sipping on his coffee. And she set her shopping bags down and she got out a magazine and she opened up the top of her coffee and she started to read the magazine and sipped the coffee, and then she reached over and grabbed a sugar cookie and ate it. And about halfway through, she noticed that the guy behind the newspaper reached around the newspaper and grabbed a sugar cookie and ate it. This kind of upset her a little bit. Thought it was kind of curious. So a few minutes later, about halfway through the article, she reached up and grabbed another sugar cookie and ate it. Sure enough, a couple minutes later, the man behind the newspaper reaches around and grabs the sugar cookie and munches on it. Now she's a little upset. She planned on those sugar cookies for her husband. And then she grabs her third sugar cookie. A few minutes later, just as she's beginning to finish that one, a man reaches around the newspaper and grabs another sugar cookie. She sips on her coffee, trying to figure out what to do and what to say, and she's so angry she knows she's going to say the wrong thing, so she decides not to say anything. And then she realizes there's only one sugar cookie left. Seems that the guy behind the newspaper read her mind. He puts the newspaper down, folds it up, grabs the last sugar cookie, breaks it in half, and offers her half the sugar cookie. Picks up the other half of the sugar cookie, tucks the newspaper under his arm, and walks off. Now she's really PO'd. How is she going to explain this when she gets home? She finishes the article that she's reading. She's kind of disgusted by now, slams the magazine shut, puts it down in the bag, the shopping bag, where she sees her bag of sugar cookies untouched. Part of cultivating gratitude is paying attention. Secondly, express your thanks. Express your thanks to people, to your loved ones, to your partners, to your children, to your co-workers, to your friends. Express your thanks to your God, to life itself. actually give thanks vocally to the people who have become important in your life. Another trite saying that we hear a lot is, count your blessings. And we usually hear that from friends who are well-meaning, who say it at all the wrong times. But there's some truth in counting your blessings. If you're having a hard time cultivating gratitude in your life, actually sit down and make a list. Who are the people in your life that have made a difference in the last 6 months? Who are the people in your life who have enriched your life and have brought it some excitement and some love and some grace? What are the events and the things that you're thankful for as well? Hopefully that list is not as long as the people, but that belongs on the list. Make a list. At the University of Nebraska, there has been a project recently called the Family Strengths Research Project, headed up by a family psychologist, Dr. Nick Stinnett. And he's been doing research for a number of years on what it is in families and households and relationships that keep those relationships strong and keep the people in those relationships feeling strong and confident. What is it, he asked. He looked at families. He looked at non-traditional relationships. He looked at people involved in all kinds of different relationships and all kinds of different household structures. And he wanted to know what were the things, when you looked at all these different families and relationships, with their ups and their downs, what were the characteristics of the relationships that had the most difficulty, and what were the characteristics of those relationships that somehow found the strength to weather some of those difficulties and come through stronger. And he wrote a book about this with 6 different characteristics, but the central characteristic upon which all the others are based is gratitude. The ability to appreciate the other. The ability to appreciate all those who are a part of your life, all those who live under the roof with you, all those you call dear. And not only simply to say to yourself, you know, I really appreciate that person and what he does for me, but to actually say that to them so that they know it. To communicate your appreciation in a variety of ways. That is what builds, according to Dr. Stinnett's research, strong households. Families and households and relationships that are strong are built on people who are vocal and visible, visual, and bodily in their appreciation, their gratitude of others. Not only for what they do, but for who they are. That's suggestion number 2, express your thanks. Suggestion number 3, bring the gratitude that you have into dialogue with the life that you live. Not just your life, which is important, of course, but the life that you live in the broader community. We are a congregation in the United Church of Christ. The United Church of Christ, sister denomination in Germany, the Evangelical Church of Germany. Remember, I think 2 years ago, a bishop from that church visited this congregation. And one of the great theologians of that church in the first half of the 20th century was a man named Karl Barth, who was very controversial in many ways. One of the ways he became controversial was when Hitler was coming to power, he organized pastors to oppose Hitler and fascism. It got him in trouble. Eventually he fled Germany for his life, no longer taught in a seminary in Germany, but taught in a seminary in Switzerland, and then when the war got close in Switzerland, he came to the United States. And he used to say, somewhere in almost every lecture that he gave at the University of Chicago, that every Christian, every morning when they're having coffee and beginning the day, should have the Bible in one hand and the newspaper in the other. Because too many Christians, he said, woke up and had a cup of coffee and read the Bible misread. It always has to be read in dialogue with who we are and where we are and the challenges that we face and the world that we live in. Well, I think Karl Barth was right. But I'd like to change that image. Instead of having the Bible in one hand and the newspaper in the other, have gratitude in one hand and the newspaper in the other. Because gratitude is at the core of our faith as Christian people. It is the basis for our belief. It is the basis for our acceptance of God's love. It is, in our tradition, the basis for morality and ethics. So, I know the world is not all hunky-dory. We don't, bringing gratitude in dialogue with our lives doesn't mean, oh, I should be thankful for everything, including a few politicians that we all know and don't necessarily love. Okay? That's fine. But it is precisely our gratitude that allows us to see the truth of the situation. It is precisely our gratitude that can help clarify for us those things for which we are grateful, things in our lives, in our relationships, in our community, in our congregation, in our world that can be changed in order to nurture gratitude, not only in ourselves, but in others. It's true that some people have little to be grateful for, but it seems to me that if we put our gratitude in dialogue with our lives and the world in which we find ourselves, then that is an invitation on God's part for us to roll up our sleeves and deal with the problems that face us and our neighbors. There is much to be grateful for as we move toward Thanksgiving of 2010. But there is also much pain, much sorrow, much that is simply wrong. There are too many suicides. There will be too many lonely people at Thanksgiving and Christmas. Surely gratitude moves us to make a difference. So gratitude is more than an attitude. It's a stance. It is a way we embrace the world. It is a way we express our faith. One final thought. One of my favorite theologians, a medieval Catholic theologian named Meister Eckhart, who was constantly in trouble with the authorities, once said, if the only prayer you ever uttered in your entire life is thank you, that will be enough. Thanksgiving. The Eucharist that we share, and Eucharist is simply a Greek word that means thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is not just a prayer that we utter. May it also